think the presentations will be very interesting. The first will be by Ashlyn Bernier, who's speaking about entrepreneurship and the singularity. Are we preparing the next generation for the uncertain future? Ashlyn, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Solez. So I'm branching off from Shauna Pandya's talk earlier in the semester. So she gave us 2 lectures on entrepreneurism. So I'm going to dive a little bit into more how that relates to the singularity and how we're training people today to be the leaders once that point in time is reached. So just going through what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to start sort of with the skeleton. What does entrepreneurism even have to do with the singularity? So I'll discuss that a little bit, hopefully convince you that yes, in fact, they are related. And then we're going to get into what I'm calling the post-singularity entrepreneurs. What do they look like? What do I envision this breed of people, what skills do they possess, and why are they going to be important in the post-singularity world? And then lastly, we're going to ask the question, what are we doing today to train these post-singularity entrepreneurs? So the first question, what does entrepreneurism have to do with the singularity? I think it has everything to do with the singularity. And that is because when we look at the definition of the singularity, we know we can expect enormous and unpredictable change in terms of social, political, culture, and to say the least, technological domains. We can't predict what it's going to look like. We just know there's going to be massive change in almost every aspect of our lives. And how can we maneuver through these changes? So there are going to be many challenges that are going to be faced by the human race. And we need to ask the question, how are we going to be able to not only survive through these challenges, but also maintain some aspect of our humanity? And I believe that the solution here is entrepreneurs. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the definition of the entrepreneurs, because today when most people hear that word, I used to think it just meant someone who was unemployed and needed to come up with something that, to say they had some sort of job. But a lot of people would think that means someone who starts a business, buys a Tim Hortons and things like that, but we're going to take that definition quite far beyond the business aspect in my talk today. So we're taking beyond the traditional business founder and operator, that's sort of the traditional definition of entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about entrepreneurs in terms of the skills and qualities that this type of person possesses, in terms of risk-taking. So entrepreneurs are generally comfortable with taking not only financial, but personal, emotional risks when they undertake new ventures. Also, they have an ability to deal with criticism. So inevitably, when someone undertakes something that's risky, there's going to be people in their personal life, in their business life, that criticize them. And in order to be successful entrepreneurs, they need to be able to deal with this criticism and almost be able to disregard it in some manner. They have to have an open mind. So they have to be able to go out into the world and, like Shauna mentioned when she came here and talked to us, be able to recognize things that could be done better and just are always open to the possibility that things could be done, things could be improved and things could be done in a better way, and there's a solution to everything and there's no bad ideas. So I think that's another quality of entrepreneurism that has a lot to do with the singularity. And the ability to think beyond what is considered possible. Now, I consider this the most important aspect of the post-singularity entrepreneur, because when we look at the definition of the singularity, it's going to take us beyond what we consider possible today. So when we think about entrepreneurs, they also need to be able to think beyond what is considered possible today and think into what most may consider impossible and consider, well, is it really impossible, or is it just sort of beyond the scope of what we believe our reality to be at this point in time? So we've probably seen this picture a few times in this course. So this just, I think, represents really well that the singularity is going to take us beyond everything we know. We don't know what lies beyond this point. It's unknown. So we need entrepreneurs, or just people who can also develop that ability to think beyond what is possible and beyond what is known. So that's how I relate entrepreneurism to the singularity. I think that they're very connected. So just to reiterate, the singularity is going to take us beyond what we considered possible, and we need individuals who are able to think, therefore, beyond the possible. And this will allow these people to effectively address these profound social, cultural, legal, ethical issues that the singularity is going to represent for the human race. So talking a little bit more about Shaunas Workshop and how that really got me thinking about all of this, and why I decided to do my term project stemming off from her talk. So she gave us instructions on the second day that she came and lectured to do an in-class exercise, and the instructions were to come up with things that we think could be done better, or things that we wish existed. And the instructions were basically, nothing is a bad idea, no idea is crazy, suspend all judgment, she wanted us to produce as many ideas as we possibly could in our small groups, and to think beyond the possible. And this was really difficult for a lot of us. I know we were split into two groups, and in my group it was really hard to think beyond the confines of what we considered possible, to think, well, what about, these crazy ideas that she wanted us to come up with? It was just really, really difficult for us to silence this internal critic that I believe we all had that's telling us, no, that could never work, that could never happen, blah, blah, blah. So after that workshop, I really got to thinking about how can we train people to silence that internal critic? Can we train people to be able to just, walk around for a day and come up with a dozen ideas for things that could improve the way the world works? Shauna seems to have spent a lot of her career training herself to get to that point, and she seems to be quite successful at it. But when we were given 15 minutes in a class to try to come up with all these ideas, it was pretty difficult. So I started to think, can we train these aspects of entrepreneurism that I believe are going to be required for the human race to be successful following the singularity? Can we even train it? And what are we doing to even try to train it? Is it even being recognized as something that's important? So I've come up with this working definition of the singularity entrepreneur. So this is a person who will develop innovative and creative solutions to the problems faced by the human race after the singularity by thinking creatively, without fear of judgment, and in a manner adaptable to the unknown. And this last part I think is particularly important, in a manner adaptable to the unknown, because we can't predict what's going to happen beyond the singularity, and therefore we can't predict what specific skills and thought processes might be required by these people. So another very important aspect of this entrepreneurial individuals are going to be the ability to rapidly adapt to new environments. So this was something that we faced in class with Shauna's Workshop. All of a sudden we were faced with an exercise that we weren't really comfortable with, we hadn't had a lot of experience with, and I think it will be important for the singularity entrepreneur to be able to quickly adapt to different environments, new challenges, new situations and environments, and able to work effectively in those environments. So the question now is, well, can we train this? And this sort of come back to the nature versus nurture debate, which has been around for many, many years, and we haven't really come up with an answer on. And I think the general consensus here is that it's a mixture of certain skills that you might be genetically predisposed to, and also the environment that you're exposed to as you're developing as an entrepreneur. So the question, can we teach entrepreneurial skills, or can they be learned by experience, I think is a little bit more relevant. Not necessarily are you born with it or can you learn it, but can you learn it solely in a classroom through theory, or do you have to go through entrepreneurial experiences to truly develop these skills? So there was a recent article just in March in the Wall Street Journal online that actually asked this question specifically. And I just brought this up. They did just a poll online. Can entrepreneurism be taught? And 61% say yes, 39% say no. So it's not terribly skewed in either direction. So there seems to be people in both camps, and I'm assuming people who read articles such as this are involved in business of some sort. So there doesn't seem to be a definite answer either way on this. And the article actually took two different authors and who took two different points of view on this issue. But the bottom line that I took out of this was that certain elements of entrepreneurship can be taught and others cannot be taught but must be learned by practice. And this is in just like any profession. You can go to medical school for 4 years, but you're going to need to actually see some patients in order to learn all the skills required to be a physician. So things like experiencing failure and learning to deal with criticism and how to recognize a good idea or something that might work versus something that probably isn't. And that sort of stems back into experiencing failure and learning sort of what ideas you might want to pursue and what you might not. So it's things like this that can only be experienced through the actual entrepreneurial process that are just as important as the classroom skills. So how can we teach this? If I've convinced you that entrepreneurism and people with these entrepreneurial skills are going to be important post-2045, well, if I've also convinced you that it is possible to teach this, some aspects of it, well, how can we? Well, we want to foster creativity. That's, I think, a really important aspect of entrepreneurism. Being able to think in many different ways, and this gets back to silencing that internal critic, and every idea is a good idea. Encouraging radical thinking. It's funny, now that I see this, this reminds me of President Indira's recent call out to the university community to awaken your inner radical and give your ideas to the university on how things can be better done around here. So maybe that's an aspect of the U of A that they are fostering these entrepreneurial skills without, I guess, really knowing it. But encouraging radical thinking. So that's just another way to say thinking creatively. Just, there's no bad ideas. I think that's the most difficult thing for most people, is to just think beyond what is possible and acceptable today, to think about what might be possible in 5, 10, 100 years from now. And using failure as a learning tool. So failure is a critical aspect of becoming an entrepreneur, and using those experiences of failure to learn from, I think, is something that's also really important when we're considering teaching entrepreneurism. And exposing people to unpredictable situations. So this is a critical part of my definition of an entrepreneur. They must be able to adapt to these rapidly changing and unknown environments, and this gets us back to Shauna's lecture and workshop and the things we all experience there. So forcing people just a little further out of their comfort zone and into this realm of impossibility. So just, it seems like it's something that will happen just an inch at a time, but with exercises like some of the ones that Shauna suggested to us at the end of your class, like taking a journal around with you for a day and writing down everything you see that you think could be done better. Things like that, I think, are exercises that we could all employ to stretch our minds just a little bit and begin to consider things that are beyond the norm and beyond the possible. So the big question then is, what are we doing to teach this, if it is in fact important, and if it is in fact something, like, I believe that our leaders in this province should be recognizing as something that is important and should be focused on. So we've heard a lot over the last couple of years. I know I've heard this term many, many times in conversations with people. We want to diversify our economy. We want to branch out into, beyond the energy sector and develop other aspects of Alberta economy. Well, how are we expecting to do that unless we are fostering entrepreneurial activity and developing entrepreneurial skills in our younger generation? So there is an Alberta Entrepreneurs Association, but they do not teach. They simply provide support and financial aid to Alberta entrepreneurs. So there are agencies out there like this. Just from looking at their website, they don't seem to be that active, unfortunately. But I do believe that organizations such as this are important to have for those early stage entrepreneurs. There's also a really interesting organization called Startup Edmonton. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but they are planning to launch an on-campus branch sometime this spring, summer, where they'll have office hours and students can come and drop in and bring their ideas, get advice from people who've been there. They'll also be offering some workshops to students on how can you even tell if entrepreneurship is a possibility for you. So I think things like this are really important, and I'm really happy to see others recognizing the importance of entrepreneurism and actually doing something about it. Tech Edmonton is sort of a Startup Edmonton on a much larger scale. They have some student programs. They have a I2M business plan competition that I had some friends compete in the fall. So students with business ideas can come up with a business plan and pitch it and get some feedback. So I think workshops and competitions such as this do start to teach some of those skills, like experiencing failure and how to deal with criticism, how to, so I did my PhD here at the University of Alberta, and I was quite disappointed not only with my own research, but with many of my colleagues. You finish your thesis and it gets put on a shelf to collect dust forever, and it sort of dies there. And I think many students at the university doing research, there is commercialization potential there, but it's just never considered or fostered by the students or the university or the supervisors. So I think programs offered by Startup Edmonton and Tech Edmonton have the potential to hopefully identify some of those research projects with entrepreneurial potential and hopefully convince those students that yes, it is possible, it is okay, it's a good idea to actually pursue entrepreneurial activities as a graduate student or following graduation. There's also the Canadian Youth Business Foundation, which is also a really interesting organization. They offer funding to early stage entrepreneurs who are under the age of 30. So there's lots out there for students once they make that initial decision to become an entrepreneur and do something with their idea or their research. But I think it's that first step that's most difficult. Once you've made that step, yes, there are agencies out there that can assist you, but it's making that transition from student or someone with a good idea, a garage inventor, to deciding to do something about it. That's most difficult. So this is what brings me to something I found was a bit more lacking, was looking at even younger high school and junior high students. So I think these people, the teenagers, they're at an age when they're really starting to develop how they think, what they might want to do with their life. Do they want to go to college? What are they going to do after graduation? So what are we doing with these students at this age to get them to consider entrepreneurism and to start developing those entrepreneurial skills, risk-taking, creativity, thinking innovatively? Are we doing anything targeting this generation? It's a critical time. I couldn't find anything that specifically we're doing to target these students. They have summer camps in the US that are specifically entrepreneurial summer camps for junior high and high school students, which I just think is a really neat idea. So it's almost some of the things that Shauna's experienced and some of the things that she brought us through in class. I think that would be amazing to do with junior high students who might still, have that creativity, and their internal critic may still be turned down on low. So they might come up with some really, really interesting ideas. Anyone with children in the room knows that kids have a very different way of looking at things. So I think, it's the perfect time for us to start to develop some of those skills. I went on the Alberta Education website, couldn't find any mention of concepts such as creativity, entrepreneurship, independent thinking. I know it's deviating a little bit away from core curriculum. Yes, students have to know how to write and know their math and all of that, but I think that there is room in those subjects to also teach some of these entrepreneurial skills, almost just sneaking them in the back door. So what? So hopefully I've convinced you today that entrepreneurs have something to do with the singularity, and they're going to be important for the human race following the singularity, and that it is possible for us to teach entrepreneurial skills, and that although there are some programs in place in Alberta to try to foster entrepreneurism, I think we could be doing more, especially at the younger stages. So we need entrepreneurs to guide us through this unpredictable, strange, and radically different world that the singularity will bring. Entrepreneurism can be taught, but these people also need experience to truly develop these skills. And Alberta does have organizations to teach and assist early stage entrepreneurs, but there is a lack of programming for younger students. Short-sighted government, I won't talk too much about that today, even though I believe it is quite timely with the leadership debate happening this evening. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention at this point, and I would love to hear your thoughts or questions at this point. Thank you.
So that was fascinating. Let me give Manny a voice here. Yes. So what thoughts did you have?
First of all, I wanted to congratulate Ashley on the very interesting essay. I just wonder whether the epitome of the entrepreneur is not the scientist, who is really a person who sets up a hypothesis and then tries to prove it, and has to deal with a lot of failure, and has to accept criticism as they go along. And yet, they do not veer from that thing that they want to find or improve. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it's fascinating that the scientists nowadays can end up making some money out of his endeavors. Although that should not be the main purpose, of course, of science. At least I don't think so. But in the case of business, I just wonder if it's a little harder, because there isn't this external support that you get as a scientist as you examine the hypothesis and you try to do experiments to prove them. And I was wondering what you thought about teaching that, that aspect. In other words, the difference between, because by the way, excuse me, let me go back here a minute. There is sort of an internal antithesis, if you wish, about being focused and at the same time open-minded. Because, sometimes if you want to be focused, to be open-minded, then all these other ideas will intercede and interfere with what you are supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if you are an entrepreneur, you can't be too liberal, because you're being liberal about your money, and you may not have enough to go around for what your business enterprise that you want to establish. So I was wondering how you have thought about teaching, for example, high school students, the difference between focus in the sense you're talking about, and at the same time being able to receive input in relation to their business, and at the same time realize that there's a finite amount of resources that they require in order to develop their business.
I think that's where the concept of experience comes in. It's only through experience that you're going to be able to recognize that point when you might need to move on from your idea that you've been intensely focused on and be open-minded to maybe changing your hypothesis, working on something else entirely different. Your comments on science versus business are really interesting to me, because I come from a basic sciences background, and I'm now in business school. And I feel very strongly that graduate studies, being a scientist and working with hypotheses, investigating them, really develops entrepreneurial skills in students and in scientists. I think more needs to be done to exploit those skills that all these scientists have developed, because many of them just tend to exist in the safety of academia, because it is a safe environment. You're dealing with money, yes, you're getting government grants, but when you go up for renewal of your grant, there's not usually very much weight placed on have you commercialized, it's have you published. So it's pretty safe. Looking in the business world, it's much more risky. You're dealing often with your life savings or other people's money, so you're much more accountable. So they are two very different worlds, but I think there's much potential, especially in our province, for crossover between science and business, and it might be a matter of a scientist and someone trained in business working together, both bringing sort of the skills and experience and expertise they have to the table.
Right. Well, it's interesting. If you think of it, there is a 1 in 5 chance if you apply to the NIH, for example. I don't know what it is in the National Research Council in Canada, to get a grant.
I don't think it's that good.
It's about 17.5% if you apply to an NIH grant with success. Mm-hmm. However, there is only 1 in 5,000 patents that become profitable and make some money. So actually the risk, as you mentioned, is extremely much higher in the world of business than science. So the other aspect of your essay is that it isn't only the risk you're taking monetarily, you already have a lot of odds that are against you. The probabilities are really small that if you're going to take, of course I'm talking about things that you've discovered or invented. That's not necessarily, I may want to set up a restaurant that is going to be very successful, and I don't know what the rate of failures are there, but we certainly, I know for a fact that over the years, some of my best restaurants in New York have disappeared without a trace. So in other words, there's also large failure in whatever business you undertake, much greater than I think it is in science. Yes. So I wonder how you have thought about that as well.
No, absolutely. There's a huge risk in being an entrepreneur, and I think, it's that perception that 1 in 5,000 patents become profitable that makes no one really consider going that route. How many high school students or undergraduates or graduate students graduate and say, well, I want to be an entrepreneur? It's very, very rare. So I think things can be done to maybe increase that 1 in 5,000. Considering we have 7,000 graduate students here at the University of Alberta, that means every 5 years, 7,000 theses are being published. Well, if we can even turn a few of those into profitable businesses, I think that should be the goal, and that should be the expectation.
Right.
That if that is in fact the statistic, it should be possible.
Well, that's very good, because you have a sense that of proportionality of what it is to teach people to be entrepreneurs, so that even if people learn to be entrepreneurs, they need to realize that that's not an easy thing to do, and it's certainly fraught with a lot of failure.
Yes.
And as long as people understand that, I don't think there is anything wrong with teaching everyone. By the way, you need to be an entrepreneur to run a household and to be a father of a family. And I think a lot of people fail at that as well, because they don't have the skills to watch out for their finances and realize what risk it is to be alive. And they need to be taught all these other skills as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I really like your concern about us graduate students working very hard, producing a lot of great work, and then it all goes to naught. So I was wondering if you had reflected on maybe or could offer an opinion on maybe one thing that the graduate student could do to change that, and maybe one thing that the university could do to change that?
Yes, that's a really good question. So I don't know if any of you know, but I'm actually taking on the position of president of the Graduate Students Association next year. So I will have opportunity to maybe actually do something about some of this. And I think, it's a really good question, especially what can students do? But because I think many graduate students have to realize that it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time for the system to maybe catch up with ideas like this. So it becomes the responsibility of graduate students to take matters into their own hands. I know something that I caught on to in not until probably the 4th year of my PhD was that if I wanted to potentially commercialize my research or be an entrepreneur or get a job at all someday, I needed to start getting out there and meeting people who've been there, done that. And there's a lot of opportunity for students to attend events where, as a student, you have a very unique opportunity to talk with people because you have this card in your back pocket. I'm a student, talk to me, share your experiences with me, and people are more than willing to do that because you're just a harmless student. So I've found that over the past few years, I can email almost anyone that I'm interested in learning from or that's gone from, done a graduate studies and then gone on to form their own company or something really interesting, email them, would you have coffee with me? And more often than not, they're more than happy to. So I think that's something that I would like to see more students taking advantage of. Something that the university could do, I think, recognizing the opportunities that organizations like Startup Edmonton and Tech Edmonton have coming on campus and being more visible, highlighting success stories, so companies that have spun out from the university. I've met several graduate students who've gone on to form their own companies with their supervisors, things like that, that needs to be highlighted and not looked at as just a 1 in a 5,000 chance, but rather an opportunity that every graduate student has. At the provincial level, and I don't know if any of you follow me on Twitter, I'm just at Ashlyn Bernier, and I wrote a blog for a website called albertavotesmatter.com today on a very similar topic to this, about creating, we talk about the cost of our degrees, what they're costing us, and tuition, and that's everywhere. But what about the value of our degrees? There's not much discussion on how valuable are these degrees? What can we do with them once we leave the university? And I think that's where we have to look to the provincial government, especially right now, and do they recognize this as something that's important, and what are they doing about it? So just a quick example, many graduate students receive provincial funding. That's how they're supported throughout their studies. And when students apply for funding, there's heavy emphasis on their grades and their publication records. I would like to see more emphasis on professional development and community involvement, because I believe those are aspects of graduate studies that are underemphasized but are the most important in the long run. So I think things like that are things that our leaders can be doing in order to create a generation of students that are more productive and can actually invest back in our province after the government has invested thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in their educations.
So I think we should change over the microphones.
Sure. Thank you all so much. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I've been following intermittently your course, and I find it fascinating. I think it's a new approach, and I'm glad that you're doing it, and I'm learning of some of the things you put on in the Facebook and so on.
Right.
So I think you should continue doing this, and it's a wonderful experience for students and everyone else.
Yeah, well, we plan to do it forever. So
Okay.
anyway, and it will just get better and better.